G'day, ZiggyD here. With the 3.6 push to the meta for energy shields, CI builds, and spellcasters, I know some of you guys are playing CI builds potentially for the first time, so I wanted to make a guide on how to transition over to CI, Chaos Innoculation, Energy Shield full build when you reach endgame. Now, this will work for any Chaos Innoculation build, but certainly in a fresh league and on your first character, a Chaos Innoculation swap is most easily done on an Occultist, so there's a slight bias there. In terms of deciding when it's time to swap, usually you're looking around the mid-level 70s, mid to early level 70s. This is going to depend on whether you have your Ascendancies that are relevant, so in this case on an Occultist, Wicked Ward and Vile Bastion, you want to at least have those. And then you want to have about 10 to 15 respec points available, which is enough you can get through the side quests that grant free respec, so that won't cost you anything. And then you want around 20 to 40 chaos in currency as a minimum. Now, certainly specific currency costs of something like this are going to fluctuate a lot in the early days in a league and depending on the league and how many people are playing certain archetypes, but this price range is based on current costs right now in Synthesis Softcore. Now, I'll be doing this in a rough order of priority, but in terms of capping out your resistances, which is always a priority for moving into endgame, as you go through these item slots, your desires will get more and more specific. And a tip for making sure that you can most easily cap out your resistances is to make sure that if you have any rares with open suffixes, you leave those until the end, and then you can mastercraft the resistances that you need the most. So let's say you get to the end of your gearing, you have all of your items, and at that point, you're still missing a bit of lightning resistance. If you have an open suffix on your chest armor, you can then, at that point, craft some lightning resistance, get you capped, and that can help a lot. Another little bit of a tip here is for any rare searches, it can be handy to both examine what's available already crafted for you, and if you go into the filters, you can also look for things like open suffixes. So if we go, for example, and type in open suffix here, 1, this will guarantee a minimum of 1 open suffix that'll be available for you to master craft. So we can go ahead and search that, and we'll find only items that have an open suffix. Now, some of these might already be mastercraft, and you can actually disable mastercrafting in the filters if you want to. So if we go crafted, no, we can find things that aren't mastercrafted. So here's energy shield items looking within our goals that have an open suffix and aren't currently mastercrafted. These searches can be helpful for finding bargains sometimes because people will price basically what the item is, not what it could be, and you can then take that item and make it better with mastercrafting. So that can be a bit of a tip. All of these searches that I'll be showing off in this video will be located in the description below. So if you just want to click them and open a search that's relevant for your gearing, then you can do so, and hopefully that'll be helpful. Okay, so one of the most important slots on a CI build is your chest armor. It is your biggest single source of energy shield, and that is indeed the priority. There's two ways you can go about this at early endgame. If you're playing something like a Bane build or a Cold Dot Occultist, then you have a lot of damage and you can easily get away with a 4-link at early endgame, and that can make things really cheap in the beginning and allow you to get more energy shield. So if we take this approach, we're looking for around 430 energy shield plus, and that's after quality crafts. All of these are after quality crafts on a rare, and the potential to have some extra resistances or mastercraft some resistances in the suffixes. In terms of rares versus uniques, mostly you're going to be looking at rares, but there is one unique here, and you can see this in the list, and that's Beast Fur Shawl. That is a pretty decent choice. It won't have any resistances, and each unique you add to your build that doesn't have resistances will increase the strain on your resistance gearing for each subsequent slot that you try and purchase. So it'll make further and further, as you go along, things more expensive. So just keep that in mind. Beast Fur Shawl has a very decent amount of energy shield for this point, and it has a fair bit of damage and some area of effect. It does have a little bit of an increased damage taken mod on that, so it's a little bit more YOLO, and that kind of counteracts the higher resistances that it does have, but it is a decent option if you want to go on a 4-link. If you're going on a 5-link, then we're probably going to be looking at something else. So on that note, the alternative option is for you to look for 5-links. Now, in terms of doing this, buying early league a 5-link that's already crafted with high energy shield, 400 energy shield plus, which is high for the early endgame in a fresh league, buying one that's already crafted usually comes at quite a premium. So if we look over here, getting 400 plus energy shield or even like 390 plus energy shield chests, we're looking at like potentially 40 chaos. This one here is corrupted. So 40, 50 chaos plus. So that's starting to come in at a bit of a premium and is probably outside of the scope of our early endgame gearing here. If you have come into a bit of cash while leveling, maybe you got lucky and found an Exalt like I did, then you can split that up and buy a white 5-link. The 3 bases that you want to look for in terms of 5-linking on energy shield builds is Occultist Vestments, which have a bit of spell damage and they're usually mid-priced, Widow Silk Robes, which have a little bit more energy shield but no spell damage, and those are usually pretty cheap, and then Vaal Regalia, which have the most energy shield, but those are usually substantially more expensive, probably like 4 times the price of what you're seeing here. So if you go this route, you'll be probably picking up a white one, 5-linked of one of those bases, and then trying to craft it. Fossil crafting is the best and most consistent way to do so, and with the extra energy shield suffix dense fossils can land, then that is going to be the best way to do it. I did indeed fossil craft my chest here. It took me 2 fossils. I got a little bit lucky, but several fossils to get close to 400 energy shield. That's what you're looking for. If you land like 380, that's probably good enough to use for a while. But if you get over 400, then bonds are perfect. Dense fossils, as of yesterday when I crafted, were about 4 chaos a pop. That price may go up though, so keep that in mind and expect to at least take a few crafts to get something useful. So factor that into your pricing. So if you buy something like a 20 chaos 5-link, then craft it with 3, 4, 5 dense fossils, then factor that price in and think, maybe it's better for me just to buy a rare outright. Currently and usually early in the league, though, it is better to craft and you'll usually make a bit of a saving in doing so. People are paying a premium for the guaranteed thing. One of the next most important slots is the helmet. It's a pretty big source of energy shield as well, and we're looking for about 200 plus energy shield and some resistances if you're looking at rares. There are, however, 2 decent uniques that you can look for. One is Rime Gaze if you're on a cold build. That one is actually very good damage and has a very good amount of energy shield on it. And the other one is, if you're playing a Bane build, then Dewedri's Scorn is a bit less energy shield. I think it goes to like 190 maybe. But it has some nice damage boosts for a Chaos build as well as some curse effectiveness stuff, thanks to the plus curse gems if you put, say, your Bane in there. So those are probably your best options depending on pricing. If those options are too expensive for you, or if you want to just go for a bit more resistances and maybe some more energy shield, then you're probably looking at rares, though at this point in the league, they start to get pretty expensive pretty quickly, but something like 5 Chaos is potentially, for 200 energy shield and some resistances, is potentially a pretty good pickup. And then the next really big slot for energy shield is shields themselves. You can get a lot of shields here, and this ends up being particularly important if you're also getting a cluster like this one that has increased energy shield from equipped shield. There's 100% on the Arcane Guarding Wheel. It is quite juicy for a CI build. For shields, we're simply looking for 200 plus energy shield and some resistances, or the ability to mastercraft some resistances. So as you can see, something around that range is several 3, 4, 5 chaos maybe. Gloves are not a super important source of energy shield. Getting very high energy shield on gloves is very expensive, so we're only looking for about 80 energy shield plus on gloves, and then some resistances if we're looking at rares, which most of the time you will be. As a bit of a bonus, if you find fingerless silk gloves, those have spell damage for the implicit, so those can be nice to grab as well if you can get something like this. For example, this one right here that was listed recently is a pretty good bargain at 2 chaos, 80 energy shield, and 2 decent resists. In fact, this will probably be sold by the time the video is done recording. If you're playing a Bane build, or any build really, because an extra curse is quite powerful, Vixen's Entrapment is actually quite strong and decent energy shield to boot, though it is indeed a bit more expensive currently, and I expect these prices might also go up as people realize how good these are. Potentially keep an eye out for these. They go for up to 130 energy shield, which is pretty solid, and it might be a competitive option for you if you're not finding a rare pair of gloves you want, if you don't mind losing some resistances, or if you have some particular curse synergy. I'm using Vixen's Entrapment right now, and I picked them up for like maybe 4 or 5C. It looks like the prices are starting to go up a bit, and they may continue to do so. For boots, movement speed is the most important slot. We're looking for about 25% plus. Energy shield is not so big on boots. 90 energy shield plus is a good goal to aim for. And then, because of the existence of rainbow strides, we're looking for boots with at least 55-ish to 60% resistances in total. The result of this is that most of the time when you search these stats, and this will be the search that I link you, you'll end up just seeing a lot of rainbow strides. Typically, it's hard to actually get rare boots to drop or to craft that are better than rainbow strides at this point in the league. That will be cheaper. Usually they're going to be more expensive. And if I scroll down the list, it's going to be a long time before we see any actual rare items. So 9 times out of 10, you're going to end up with some rainbow strides, and they'll be way cheaper than equivalent rare boots. These boots right here are these are worse than Rainbow Strides, right? So Rainbow Strides are pretty much going to be the go-to nearly all the time in a fresh league for a CI swap. They have good energy shield, really good resistances, 25 movement speed is plenty for getting started, and they also have some bonus spell block, which is neat. For the belt slot, it's really hard to beat Baited Breath. You need a really good crystal belt to get more energy shield than a Baited Breath, thanks to the flat energy shield that it has in addition to the percentage increased maximum energy shield. Make sure you're searching on Baited Breath for, a pretty high energy shield roll, so I've put in the specific search here for 29 plus Baited Breaths. These are usually very cheap, and again, really hard to beat. The only time where you may not want to use Baited Breath is if you're really struggling for resistances and you're pretty low on cash. Maybe you want to pick up a rare belt that doesn't have much energy shield and instead get one with high resistances. However, it's a big source of energy shield on an early endgame CI swap, so Baited Breath is usually going to be the go-to, and it's just so cheap. For rings, the first ring is probably going to be Dream Fragments, unless you're playing a Cold Dot Occultist, and have the node that gives you freeze and cold immunity. Frigid Wake gives that one on a Cold Dot Occultist, but if you're playing a Chaos build or some other form of CI build that doesn't get Frigid Wake, then the easiest source of freeze immunity, which is super important for CI builds because you'll just be permafrozen all the time otherwise, Dream Fragments is an easy choice. It's not a particularly good ring otherwise, gives a little bit of resistances, which helps, but for the price and early endgame, this is a fine choice for your freeze solution. Later on, we'll definitely want to swap out of Dream Fragments into another solution, whether it's stacking a few different things like Elemental Avoidance, or whether it's getting a boot craft for freeze immunity or something like that. Eventually, you want to swap out of this potentially, but Dream Fragments is the early endgame budget option that solves the problem. It's the most consistent and safest choice, and is usually not too expensive. For the second ring then, we're allowed to play around with a rare. You can get some energy shield on rings, but it's not really a large amount that you can actually get, so that's not the priority. Usually this is the slot where you can get the largest single item amount of resistances early endgame like this. So what we're looking for on a ring here is just really high total resistances, and I believe my search is 110% total elemental resistances. If you can get some flat energy shield, like 10 to 15 or something, then that's a nice bonus, so keep an eye out for any bargains like that. And as a bit of a longer term goal, if you pick up a ring that's pretty decent and you might want to keep for a while, then an open prefix will later allow you to craft the Energy Shield Recharge. You can see this mod here, faster start of Energy Shield Recharge. This is really good, especially on an Occultist. So if you have an open prefix for that, then that is a very nice bonus as well. But you could potentially get a better ring later and then craft this. And then finally, the Amulet is the place to get a fair bit of energy shield and potentially solve any leftover little residual problems that you have. So for an Amulet, we're looking for some flat energy shield and some percentage energy shield. My search is showing 25 energy shield plus and 10% increased maximum plus, and then about 25 resistances, just for a little bit of resistances. You can, if you want to try and find some bargains, remove the resistance roll and search for an open suffix, and you might be able to find some that you can mastercraft a resistance suffix on, and also that gives you added flexibility to help fill out any resistances you may currently be missing. Amulets with this amount of energy shield on it and not much resistances are generally pretty cheap. A big bonus usually is going to be to get some dexterity as well. Most of these builds will need some extra dexterity, and if you can pick up some on the amulet, you'll usually save a passive point or two from getting those 30 dex nodes, and that is a nice little bonus to have. Here's a search with open suffixes and me removing the specific resistance search. So here you can find ones that you can add your own resistance to. If you're doing this and potentially finding things are pretty cheap, like you're seeing here, then what you can actually do is go back to the search and increase the total amounts of energy shield that we're looking for. Something like 30 and 13, for example, with an open suffix will allow us to get a pretty cheap amulet that we can then mastercraft some resistance to. And then again, at that point, once you've got all of your item slots filled out, you want to go back and mastercraft any missing resistances that you need to fill out and reach that 75 cap on each of your resistances. So if you've got some rares where you had some open suffixes, do that last, because that'll make it easiest to purchase gear and keep things cheap. If you do that first, and then you find yourself needing a very specific resistance, you're all of a sudden making your items that you're trying to buy more expensive by restricting the search quite a bit. So do that last. After you've done all that, the last thing to remember and not forget is flasks. You don't need life flasks anymore once you're CI, so look for utility. I mentioned earlier, freeze is a big deal, and we've dealt with that with Dream Fragments. However, there are other things that you want to watch out for. Bleed is a big one as well. So having a bleed dot on your character will keep your energy shield down and will stop you from recharging. So having bleed immunity is always a priority in PoE, so you definitely want that. Shock immunity is very nice and helpful as well. Definitely a good one to run. When we're running this many utility flasks, we can make sure we cover things like this. Curse immunity is always good to have, and CI builds usually have enough space to be able to do that. And then also Ignite is actually a pretty big one that might sneak up on you that you don't usually think about. Getting a big Ignite on you that dots and burns you down will keep your energy shield down and again prevent that recharge. So you want to make sure you cover each of those bases with your flasks. The very final thing is potentially you may have access to some jewel slots at this point, and these can be early endgame problem solvers. Ideally, you're going to be looking for things like percentage energy shield and faster start of energy shield recovery and damage for your build. Long term, but early on, you can actually use jewels to pad out your resistances. So this is a live jewel. I'm going to replace this soon, obviously, because this is left over from before I swapped. Eventually, I want to swap this to something else, but right now, it's giving me some resistances that I need to help gear. It's really ideal if you solve your resistances without jewels, but if you're using a couple of uniques like I am, then jewels can be a nice slot to help make that a little bit easier for you without making your gearing too expensive. So guys, again, I'll include these searches and some variants of in the description below. I hope you guys have found this helpful. Good luck with your CI builds. They are very strong and fun once you have got them all kitted out and kind of understand how all the process works. That's it for now. I'm ZiggyD, and thanks for watching.